I my mental acuity is returning. I'm getting more serious about, well, for one, improving my resume, and it's real difficult to improve my resume because the number one negative about it is the absence of employment history. I was in a bit of well, not quite my best mental state over the weekend, and I posted a bunch of videos to my LinkedIn, which I'm going to leave up for now. I don't really have faith that removing those videos will get me employed because those videos have not been on my LinkedIn for a very long time, and I still haven't gotten a job. So it seems like there's other things that are more important to facilitate employment than that. But I want to focus on some specific things. Number one, the cognitive dissonance of the Mormon who was trying to quote unquote help me. So when I asked him why doesn't the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints oppose marijuana, his cognitive dissonance was visible. It was not just observable. You could see on his face the thought process. And to diagram it, there's a line right in the middle, and then on each side of this line, you have opposing thoughts, and these two things cannot be true at the same time inside his head. And so when I asked him why doesn't the Mormons, just so you know that their identity labels switch, that's a deception and manipulation in itself. They're now rebranding as the LDS because it's a corporation, but it was the Mormons. It's the Book of Mormon. It's the Mormons. They have an angel named Moroni, or I can't remember the exact word Mormon comes from, but Joseph Smith made it up, like the whole religion. Anyway, so he had to think on his own, well, why wouldn't my divine leader that I worship as a god, right? I worship this man as a god because he's a prophet, despite there's a diagnostic criteria in the Jewish Old Testament for what is and isn't a prophet, and you can apply this diagnostics to detect false prophets. So he's not a prophet, Mr. Russell M. Nelson. He's just the head of the hierarchy of leadership, the hierarchy of authority, like the Pope of the Catholic Church, or the CIA of the United States, and the bankers that control the president like a prostitute. So Russell M. Nelson, right? This guy at this local Mormon church had to think, why wouldn't the captain here, the leader, the king, why wouldn't he make this decision to oppose pornography? And on this side of the line, you have, well, it's because he's corrupt. And we are corrupted by money, we are corrupted by greed, and so that's the only explanation. No, this cannot be true. So we have to make up an explanation on this side that explains that even though technically our foundational morals and values mean that our president, our leader shouldn't be doing these things, well, I just can't deny the other foundational morals and values that say our leader is never wrong. Right? And so he could not comprehend that this man he worships as a god, his divine leader, is human and not divine, and therefore susceptible to corruption, manipulation, deception, deceiving and manipulating his flock, his followers, his whole church, and susceptible to greed. So therefore, these two things cannot be true at the same time, and he creates some mental gymnastic explanation. This is just a kind of forensic psychology. I was applying the Raskin method of questioning, but there's not really anything to be gained from this. It's a loss for me. They were going to help me pay the rent, but I've decided that the pros do not outweigh the cons, and if I'm going to get hit with involuntary exposure to marijuana at that building, it's not worth the money that they're going to give me to help me out with rent and food and things like that. So if I could just remove the involuntary exposure to secondhand marijuana, then I would have been employed like years ago. It's insane to me how corrupt the government, society, etc. is getting. It's been getting this way for a very long time, and it just blows my mind. Anyway, so then he had to make up some sort of explanation that, that made it so his leader is not corrupt and his church is not corrupt and so forth and so on. But that's a curious observation in itself, because you see this in a lot of churches and the government. And speaking of which, I'd like to shift focus to the government, specifically the FBI for a second. So last night I was having a phone conversation with someone who's supposedly a friend of mine, and the guy has helped me out a lot. Like, he's loaned me money and stuff and given me rides when I moved, like, from one place to another. That was a 3-hour drive. He went back and forth twice to get all my stuff. Yeah. It's pretty insane. Sorry, I got a text message. I got distracted there. So I was on the phone with him, and I could hear... I detected surveillance, which, according to the CIA videos that I'm watching, that's part of being in the CIA. Not that I am in the CIA or would join or they'd have me, but I can pick up their techniques from these people who are spilling some of the beans on YouTube, like Kiriakou, the traitor. And so, in extracting the data and collecting the information there, you learn how to detect surveillance to a fair degree. And so somebody was likely listening to my conversation last night by quote-unquote wiretapping my phone. But it's not really wiretapping because it's not wired communication, it's wireless. But somebody was definitely listening to my conversation because I got the feedback, right? It's the same thing when you're on the internet in a Zoom meeting or something and your microphone and your speaker are near each other. So I doubt this is the FBI, bugging my phone or whatever. This is probably... whoever's gang stalking me, my cyber stalkers. My strong theory is it's drug dealing, weed pushers, because I'm so outspoken against marijuana legalization and marijuana in general because of the harms it causes. And I think I've been cyber stalked for years and haven't been able to do anything to stop it. That's insane to me that I can't just call the cops or the feds or somebody and say, hey, I'm being, somebody from who knows where in the state of California, overseas, a mile away, I have no idea, is utilizing the internet and, electronic devices to spy on me and manipulate me and collect information on me, the panopticon effect. And it's clearly not the feds because it was very sloppy. I could hear whoever it was vaping, And I said, are you vaping, to my friend? I don't think he vapes. All the times we've interacted, he has no signs whatsoever of being a vapor. But given the dishonesty and drug use amongst Christians that I've been interacting with, it is possible that he could have been vaping and I was on speakerphone, and that explains the feedback loop. The audio feedback loop. Or he had someone with him in person and I was on speakerphone and they were eavesdropping and they were the ones vaping. Because when I asked, are you vaping, there was a cessation in the sound for a few minutes, maybe 5 or 10 minutes. And then eventually it came back. So whoever was listening, or my friend, stopped. And then their addiction took over their brain and they started vaping again. Now, I can't imagine a federal agent that the FBI would be so incompetent and so, weakened and corrupted that they're hiring drug addicts to do their ops. Maybe it's possible, but I don't think so. But that's a possibility as well. So it's either someone is spying on me, they're hacking my phone through Google or something, I have no idea. And so I contacted my local Federal Bureau of Investigation field office. And the answering machine said that there's a lot of people receiving scam phone calls from the FBI, but it's not actually the FBI. It's some sort of hackers that are spoofing, whatever that means. So that way the phone number you receive on your caller ID is the actual FBI phone number, but it's some scammers that are pretending to be the FBI and saying, you got to send us money or you go to jail, we have these charges on you, we have these investigations on you, whatever, send us money or we're going to arrest you. And so if the FBI has that message on their answering machine, that means that, well, number one, if it is drug dealing, weed pushing scumbags that are cyber stalking me, they don't fear the FBI. They don't fear law enforcement at all. This correlates to my previous observation with Vashon Island that weed pushing drug dealers have more power than the government over the society, over Vashon Island, etc. Well, it's not just Vashon Island. Like, I'm in Virginia, and it's happening here. Like, drug dealers have more power and control than the FBI over the government and society, etc. And so, my theory there is that a corrupt government is a weak government, and therefore the corruption in the FBI has crippled them to the point where they can't even stop this cyber hacker or whoever it is that's if they can't stop whoever that is from impersonating the FBI digitally through smartphone electronic communication, I don't think they're going to be able to do anything about my cyber stalkers and my what is it called, gang stalking? Yeah, my gang stalkers. See, because I thought initially, well, the FBI has to be aware of this, and the CIA, they're not stupid, right? They have to be aware that I've been, getting cyber stalked and interfered for years now. Like, I would put a Craigslist ad looking for drug-free housing, marijuana-free housing, and it would get taken down in a second. And that's been going on since Albuquerque 2019, so I've been cyber stalked by Weed Gang for a very long time, and they use my smartphone and my URL and my Wi-Fi and my laptop, all this stuff to, cut off communication, deceive, manipulate, control my life. This happened recently, to where I've learned to distrust Google and Microsoft, etc. But, for example, so when I left Lynchburg to move to Powhatan, this was a Craigslist ad, and like all Craigslist ads, they advertise no smoking and no marijuana on the property, and the lady even had me sign a lease. She conducted a background check that I had to pay for, which is fine. Like, my credit was what I was worried about, and but that was apparently okay. But when I went to make sure that I wasn't being deceived, right? Like, they're treating me like I could be scamming her, but what if she's scamming me? Well, I Googled this woman's name, and nothing came up in that town except different addresses, the wrong addresses, the wrong information, and another woman with the same first and last name in British Columbia who, like, matched all sort of traits on, the Google search results that this Craigslist ad had as well. And so whoever my, manipulator is, who's trying to manipulate me with Google results and search engine manipulation effects and whatnot, they tried to interfere with my moving to this woman's house, with remotely, without even being possibly in the state, let alone in the town. They did it from miles away through, wireless transmission, to where I would not move in with that one because I believed it was a scam, because Google was trying to say it was a scam. Well, I decided to reject Google because I know Google is evil and it's run by evil scumbag people, given the fact that Google is weaponized to push drugs and pornography, etc. And I decided to believe the woman instead. So I showed up in real life. And sure enough, Google was lying yet again. It's insane to me that I can't call any government, law enforcement, whatever, and say, hey, Google's doing this evil stuff. Look, they lied to me. They try to ruin my life. Can't you guys do anything? And the FBI, the local sheriffs, whoever, they're just like, no, we can't stop Google. They own the banks. They make the laws. They control my paycheck, so the laws don't apply to them. Like, so psychologically neutered. It's insane. But then I also think of my experiences with corruption in law enforcement. So it's not as simple as, oh, the law enforcement is just the victims of, the banks and their corruption. No, no, no. It's all corrupt all across the board. And just to cite an example of that, and there's going to be a lot of forensic psychology here. There's going to be a lot of general psychology, so this will be applicable towards anyone who considers hiring me. But like I said, I think my biggest steps to getting employment is getting a driver's license. and doing my resume upgrade through the skills website on my university. They do. They have actually pretty cool stuff that I intend on getting serious about today, now that it's Monday, and I have a week off between courses, between semesters. Anyway, so Liberty University. That's a good tie-in because that connects law enforcement and Christian churches. Same with the LDS. So the LDS, we'll just start off there because I can't remember what I've already expressed and what I haven't. So I'm just going to re-analyze some things, re-express some things, just in case I didn't go over them already in specific detail. In 2019, I became aware that the LDS, Russell M. Nelson, etc., they were a corporation, not a religion, not a church, and therefore they were analyzing social media trends, and just like politics, just like the White House, doing the same thing. And it's happening again, but their net worth went from 19 billion to 269 billion, so they could out lobby the cannabis industry and the porn industry. But then they would lose all their money. And it's weird because you think Christianity is like, wait a minute, if you have $270 billion net worth and you could put that into stopping drugs and pornography from corrupting children, which the Bible even says, right? Better they should be drowned with a millstone around their neck. Oh, well, we choose to reject those scriptures because that means we lose money. It's impossible not to detect deception with Mormons, Christians, Jews, you name it, all the religious people, and government and law enforcement. The tie-in. So attending Liberty University was the same thing. I began to detect a lot of psychologically manipulative terminology, the same globalist agendas, feminism, LGBTQ, ethnic diversity, like all this stuff that I'm also detecting from LinkedIn with their LinkedIn education courses. It's definitely psychological manipulation. Education is manipulation, neuroplasticity, etc., etc., etc. So, what really got me banned and expelled from Liberty was simply that I kept detecting some strange observations aside from the psychologically manipulative terminology. I was taking a criminology course through them, and this is not the first course that had these specific things, but given that I was abandoned, had to self-educate in psychology, I learned the general semantics theory, where you assess someone's mental health by the structure of their sentences, the syntax, the nuance. And so I began to detect a lot of, what's the correct word there? I want my word selection to be specific. A lot of non-Christian and anti-Christian content within their course material. One of those in criminology, written by Irene Adler, was communism, Black Lives Matter, and drug legalization, along with LGBTQ acceptance, etc. Now, I want to be clear about this, because Irene Adler is Jewish, but this is not necessarily a Jewish conspiracy. I guess it could be, but I doubt it. And here's why. So, the stuff she was expressing would have gotten her shot in the street by a 1920s communist. The Bolshevik Revolution, the Red Army Revolution, was not pro-drugs and pro-gay marriage. Those things were not allowed in the Soviet Union. So it's weird to me that she's framing it as like, oh yeah, Marxism is gay marriage and drug legalization. Yeah, no, it's not. And then Black Lives Matter as a Marxist thing, that's really dumb and dishonest, or dishonest, because Karl Marx wrote these letters to Engels, where he used the N-word a lot, and specifically stated that Africans will never build civilization on their own to the point where they can go through the class warfare and class struggle necessary to achieve the classless state. He was very racist against blacks. And he was Jewish and anti-Semitic. And he was baptized as a Christian, but went atheist. He wrote that the Jew has replaced their God with money. So he was an anti-Semitic Semite, just like Bobby Fischer. What was that guy's name? George Burroughs, Dan Burroughs, etc. Right? A bunch of anti-Semitic Semites. So Marxism also led to communism, which had the de-Christianization of Russia, which led to a lot of persecution, imprisonment, and occasionally executions of Christians. So it made no sense to me that the Christian university was promoting anti-Christian things like communism that murdered Christians. Like how did that make any sense? Now I get Jesus is a masochist, and so the Massachrist means you just love the suffering and the pain, and you're please hurt me, please martyr me. Like, I think that's really stupid and Christian brainwashing and not grounded in reality. But it is a Christian university with a lot of money, and it has a large net worth due to Jerry Falwell Jr., which there was that whole thing, that controversy, which you can Google on your own if you don't already know. Sorry, I got a hiccup. But one of the staff in Liberty told me off the record, because I would constantly ask Liberty, well, how is it that you guys are a Christian university, but you're teaching this anti-Christian material, and you're going through Macmillan, who was founded by Robert Maxwell, who was a Mossad, intelligence operative, and his daughter is Ghislaine Maxwell, the Jeffrey Epstein madam, who Donald Trump recently, released. Like, how corrupt is that? What? If I'm in forensic psychology to detect violations of the law, it's impossible not to detect the wealthy and powerful violating the law publicly, because nobody's stopping them. The FBI isn't stopping them, the DOJ, nobody's stopping these elite billionaires. It is insane how much impunity the wealthy and powerful have to get away with all this horrible stuff they're doing, these atrocities. Corporate ethics and all that stuff aside, apparently. Anyway, so Liberty would not respond, so I began to post it on their Twitter. Along with other things, like I was applying a psychological experiment to highlight the bias and subjectivity of internet censorship, and with social media censorship, I would insult all the races. Blacks, browns, and when I say browns, it's really a misnomer for people to use the term people of color. Like, just because my skin evolved the same tone as Arabs and Cambodians because you're along the same equatorial line for centuries does not mean I am the same as a Mexican, as like an Arab or a Cambodian or just other brown people with the same skin tone. We're completely different. Different languages, different bone structure, skeletal structure, different beliefs. Very similar probably with the bone structure and stuff, but differences in culture, food, etc. But anyway, it's quite the meta-analysis, so it's really difficult to do the Aristotelian tactic of just choosing what is necessary to make the point and what is not necessary, because specificity is essential. But nonetheless, I insulted all the different races, and that includes the white race, and I also posted Jewish supremacist stuff. So the whole point of that psychological experiment was to see what provoked reaction and what did not. Because I've practiced Stoicism so much, one of the things I did to eliminate my susceptibility to empathy manipulation and emotional manipulation was I would start fights on the internet to provoke people to insult me, and then measure my response, gauge my response. Is my heart rate accelerating? Am I feeling muscle tension increasing? Am I releasing norepinephrine? I would self-observe and assess if I was experiencing an involuntary stress response to pixels on a screen, involuntary emotional response to video and audio from a smartphone or a laptop or some sort of electronic device. And therefore, if I could reduce it, then that would reduce the media influence on me, and therefore this whole psychological manipulation of me by my smartphone, by Facebook, by YouTube, by all these apps and social media companies and search engines and artificial intelligence who deceive and manipulate the masses and our propaganda machines and so on. Well, Liberty, I don't think they were happy about the fact that I was telling the truth about their corruption. They were compromising their values for money, just like the LDS. Any academic institution or religious institution, or in Liberty's case, the fusion of both, that has a high value, a high net worth, they are targeted by the bankers or corrupted or slaves to people with even more money than they have, the Epstein Island client bosses, like, I have no idea. But one of the staff did tell me they need federal funding, and so that's why they are compromising their values for money. And so they are corrupted by greed. They could just settle with being a small university. No. Greed. And that lust for wealth and power. Yeah. But that's essentially, I think, why they expelled me, because they sent me an email saying you post some concerning tweets about other minorities and women. And I thought, other minorities and women. So, okay. I was taken to the March for Life by the Orthodox Christian Fellowship, and somebody in that march was smoking marijuana, which put me in a psychotic state. The secondhand weed put me in a schizophrenic state, and I ended up posting a bunch of offensive things on Twitter, which happens a lot, but that's not the same as real life damage. I can tell the difference between fantasy and reality, between pixels on a screen and the real world. Nonetheless, they, despite having my disability accommodations, and I was scheduled to attend a mental health summit at Liberty University that was going to discuss cannabis-induced psychosis as a legal defense. So not only did they know that I was not faking schizophrenia and that marijuana sets it off, they still decided to ban and expel me. So odds are it had nothing to do with what they claimed it was, about the racist tweets, the inflammatory tweets, etc. And more about the fact that I was exposing them for being corrupt. I was exposing the corruption of the institution, and that led to my being banned and expelled with false pretenses. But they did show me a couple screenshots of the offensive tweets, and I noticed the dates. The dates were very important because they were within the 3 to 5 day window of, first attending the March for Life, where the secondhand marijuana hit me, and it was prolonged exposure, at least 20 or 30 minutes. But then, as the chemical was flushing out of my system, I attended the Orthodox Christian Fellowship, and this guy showed up stinking like weed. And so the third-hand marijuana smoke, right, when it's coming from somebody's clothes, that means the chemical is absorbed into the clothes, and if you're smelling it, you're detecting a chemical. So yeah, it's still getting in your bloodstream from third hand, not just second hand. But probably a much lower level. Nonetheless, it re-spiked the schizophrenia that was on the decline as the chemical was leaving my bloodstream, as I was metabolizing it and processing it, so the half-life was almost over. And those dates matched that specific timeline. So I thought, well, why isn't law enforcement applying these methods they're teaching me in their university about how to be effective law enforcement investigation? One of the benefits of companies like Twitter and stuff is it's a thought record that will give you a date and a time of the thought that you expressed. Now, another thing that didn't make sense to me is what people post on the internet is not necessarily an accurate reflection of who they are in reality. People can deceive and do deceive via social media constantly. So that's why I feel that it is unethical to attempt to diagnose people based on social media posts rather than in-person assessments and diagnoses. But anyway, so when Liberty showed me this evidence inventory, while ignoring the dates, times, and causes like involuntary exposure to marijuana, and therefore Liberty doesn't actually oppose marijuana legalization at all because they're slaves to corruption and finance, international finance, etc. I noticed that none of the racist tweets were the anti-white or Jewish supremacist tweets. So that means that Liberty is all, like, as I already said and repeatedly observed, implementing this globalist agenda, which is apparently anti white and Jewish supremacist. Because those two things I very specifically posted. I had my own application. I did not communicate with Liberty about this. I don't know why I would have to, because this was freedom of speech and blah, blah, blah. And I didn't even believe half the stuff I was posting. I was just seeing, I was targeting the Twitter mods to see what they would censor and what they would not. I didn't even expect Liberty University Police Department to be building a case against me as I was trying to help them, because I would report people on campus who were drug dealers, etc. One guy on Liberty's campus had a hat that said grams, ounces, pounds, and I'm like, oh, GOP, this guy's a Republican drug pusher. And I reported it, and I had a detective call me back. It was a female detective, so apparently the LUPD, Christianity is getting feminist DEI stuff going on. But I told her, like, yeah, and she said, oh, I want to make contact with that guy, because obviously someone wearing a hat like that is a drug dealer who's advertising, hey, I got drugs for sale, on the Christian campus that has a zero tolerance policy, including zero tolerance for marijuana. So as I was helping them, they were betraying me, stabbing me in the back, and building a case against me. So this corruption in law enforcement really creates, a nuance here of circumstantial, contextual perspective that gives you a broader view of why law enforcement is so corrupt right now. It's not as simple as, black and white. And another observation on that shows that companies like Google, Meta, and Microsoft have more power over America than the government does. I recall in 2019, I met a woman. Back then, I was all, oh yeah, it's Donald Trump's one of the good guys fighting the globalists. Yeah, he's a globalist billionaire. Both parties are corrupt. But she had gotten expelled from the University of New Mexico because of an offensive writing assignment she had submitted. And she fought it for freedom of speech, and it made it all the way to the state Supreme Court. And the judge initially ruled in her favor and said, you cannot expel her from campus. She's a wonderful student, very intelligent young woman, great, academic record. This is her first violation. Well, the judge reversed her decision the next day because that night she went home and got on Facebook, and the Facebook mob psychologically manipulated the female judge, right? Emotional manipulation. So the Facebook mob isn't real. These could be bots and alts, as in one person with 10 or 20 accounts, making it appear like there's hundreds and thousands of people that are upset, when in reality it's like maybe 2 or 3 people. So they construct false realities in social media that are not accurate to the reality that is offline in real life. And it worked. So Facebook and Google and Microsoft can psychologically control and manipulate judges and law enforcement and politicians, etc. Not just with money, but with pixels on a screen. And, you can manipulate behavior by manipulating information, control somebody's behavior by controlling their thoughts, etc. How did the government let it get this corrupt? Like, I'm just a normal guy. Oh, yeah. And so that reminds me as well. I'm just a normal guy trying to get a job and say no to drugs, and yet every time I leave the house, and sometimes in the house, I get hit with forced drugging, involuntary exposure to secondhand marijuana without my consent and against my will. How is the government this bad? How did the government let things get this bad? How did they allow corruption to progress this far? It's not new. This has been going on since like 2010 at least, and probably sooner than that. But it's insane, because all the wealthy and powerful churches, all law enforcement agencies, all government, they're all controlled by the same international banks, international finance. And that's wild to me, because when I detect deception, it's not just in government, it's also civilian, private sector. I've noticed thought patterns in social media accounts, based on the words they expressed, where I've heard different accounts with different names and profile pictures, but it's the exact same voice and it's the exact same speech pattern. So this is the same person with multiple accounts, different identities. I've detected white supremacist accounts, and that was my thing. Like, this could be a Fed, just because they have a picture of Hitler in the profile in 1488 and the username. That doesn't mean they're actually white supremacists. This could be a black woman, for all I know. I don't believe the information that is presented to me if it's on social media, especially. And sure enough, I realize that this is actually a Muslim who is trying to manipulate white people to hate Jews by pretending to be a white supremacist and infiltrate the neo-Nazi white supremacist circles to love Muslims and hate Jews. But then I detected Jews doing the same thing, but to get them against Muslims. And this goes back throughout history to like three factions in the Middle East: the Christians, the Muslims, and the Jews, which are ethnicities as well as religions, right? You get the white Christians, the Crusaders are mostly white, if not all white, and then the Ottoman Empire, etc. Those are all Arabs, maybe some Persians and Turks as well, of course, but basically brown Middle Easterners. And Jews. So typically two of the three factions will unite against one, but there is no permanent alliance because each faction is out for its own in the end. So that was quite hilarious to see how this ancient battle has evolved into the digital warfare, psychological manipulation battle of propaganda on social media. And it's insane. It's insane how deceptive and manipulative it is, because the same tactics that they use and, drug dealers and drug pushers and porn pushers use, the White House uses as well. For example, I've witnessed, or I've observed that there was this social media event. Now, social media, I don't know if it's the CIA alone, the deep state, whatever, but social media orchestrates these false events that don't actually happen in reality. It's only real on your smartphone. It's only real inside your mind because you saw it on your screen. That really became easy to observe and express when I lived with these white Christians in Lynchburg who were, Christian conservatives, and what they told me was the house would be marijuana free, but then I found evidence that they were actually dealing marijuana and they started smoking it in the house. Christians lied and were addicted to drugs. Imagine my shock. But the woman was telling me that Donald Trump built the wall to stop the Mexicans, because I told her that just like the cannabis industry's purchasing presidential prostitution with federally prohibited funds, well, BlackRock subsidiaries that were private prison companies, Civicor or Geocor and Civigroup, or Civicor and Geogroup, I can't remember which right now, but they donated to Trump's campaign. And had he kept his campaign promise and, built the wall and stopped the immigrants, these companies would have lost billions of dollars because they contract billions of dollars per year off of illegal immigration, housing, detention, community supervision. So Donald Trump was not going to stop illegal immigration any more than Biden was, because then his billionaire, banker buddies and basically his owners would have lost billions of dollars. They contracted like $2.5 billion from the government doing this in 2022, and just collectively increasing the amount that they get from the government off of illegal immigration. So stopping it would prevent profits. They're creating, what is that old saying? They create the disease and then sell you the cure? Yeah, something like that. So the same thing with the cannabis industry, etc. And Liberty University, the Mormons, like all these different churches and academic institutions, they're all owned by the same people. But this woman who insisted on telling me, Donald Trump built the wall. I said, you're in Virginia. You've never been to the southern border. I lived in New Mexico during the end of the Trump presidency and the middle, like from 2017, 2018, 2019, 2020. I didn't move out until 2022. I was there in person. I didn't believe what I saw on the smartphone over what I saw in front of my face. He didn't build the wall. He didn't stop the Mexicans. Illegal immigration kept coming in. You might have saw videos on TikTok and Twitter telling you that he built the wall, and maybe some artificial intelligence generated video or footage of like one section of the border where they built the wall and Mexicans were stopped or pretending to be stopped for like 20 minutes. It didn't stop anything. And so I realized that she believed this fantasy that was constructed in her mind from her smartphone, from TikTok, from Twitter, from, etc., over the reality. Oh, this is happening over there. I know it's happening for a fact because the internet said so. And so, yeah, that is the kind of idiocy, deception, and manipulation that I have to contend with. And it's insane. It's insanity to me. Like, is that how much power these tech billionaires have? Or is it that, because these are white Christians who were also junkies and drug addicts and childless and, etc. They were married without kids for like 13 years or something. Is this really like the white man is not only the architect of his own destruction because he can't live without the drugs and the booze and the porn and the prostitution, etc., but Whitey is also capitalizing off of his own destruction, like it's an opportunity to make some money. So screw the harms, screw the fact that I'm destroying my nation, as long as I make the money. Like, is that it? Is white greed the downfall of the white men? It's wild. It really is insane because their testimony was he told me that he used to smoke marijuana and then it started making him see demons. And so that's why he quit. And then I moved in and I found a baggie in my room. So their testimony there also was that they had tried to help out someone previously who the guy got him a job at the auto parts store that his dad worked and tried to help him out. And then this guy they were helping out ended up robbing them. The guy stole like all the dude's guns and, over $20,000 from the store, from the cash registers and the safe and whatnot, and fled. And so I moved in the room that the person they had previously attempted to help had lived in. And I found a Ziploc baggie with marijuana seeds and stems. And I confronted the guy about it, and he said, "Oh yeah, no, I was dealing, and I'm smart about how I do the drug deals. I only do it once in a great while, large amounts at a time. I avoid patterns and stuff like that." So there's more to the story than what he was saying, and I've detected crime with forensic psychology. And I reported it to the police. They didn't do anything. But even worse, I had my smartphone and I got on video the guy doing a hallucinogenic mushroom drug deal. These are Christians who are drug dealers. And even though the guy said that marijuana caused him to start seeing demons, he's still dealing marijuana. Why would you want other people to see demons if you're a Christian? Corruption, greed, white men. So I reported that as well to the police, and they didn't do anything. They did not take any action. My theory from that is because it was a small town, he likely knew most of the cops. They might have even grown up together, not on a first name basis and stuff like that. So yeah. That is the white Christian. That's like the Jesus thing. That was insane. So the police are worthless. They're corrupt. They investigated me for offensive tweets, but did nothing to stop these drug deals. And then I got to the crime mapping thing, and I saw there has been an increase of violent crimes with the increase of marijuana legalization and marijuana consumption, including aggravated assault, homelessness, motor vehicle theft, like all kinds of stuff. And I know homelessness isn't necessarily a crime, but it was tied into the increase of crime and, all these other crimes. Sorry, into the increase of crimes. So this really makes me question things because, for example, I can show you how I managed to diagnose my own brain injury and then later on got validated because, well, this corruption is not just churches and, church and state and government. It's also the medical industry and corporations. When I first began to self-diagnose, my major symptom presentation, which didn't make any sense to me because I was on Vashon Island, and then I went back to New Mexico, and my family, and, Taos and Colorado, and somehow nobody seemed to notice that I had trouble forming complete words and sentences. So there's two explanations that I have. One is and both fit just depending on the individual, and to varying degrees, like 80%, 20%. One explanation is they were so psychologically brainwashed by liberal political ideologies or even Christian and religious ideologies, kind of the same thing, that they would rather deny the obvious observation of symptom presentation in front of their face. That, like, it's so obvious something's wrong with my head, that something's wrong with my brain. No, let's just blind ourselves and pretend we don't see it. And so they did self-deception through ideological manipulation, caused them to just not notice that I was struggling to form words. Or they did notice, and their intentions were hostility and malice, right? Oh, well, if we get him help, that would be good for him. We don't want him to have a good life. We don't want his life to improve. We want to hurt him, destroy him, whatever we can do to make his life worse. And if that includes depriving him of diagnosis and treatment and, preventing bad things from happening as a result of his undiagnosed and untreated mental illness and brain injury, good. Two explanations. It's either incompetence or malice. Or 80% incompetence, 20% malice. So I then later on came to this conclusion based on the neuroscience that I was reading, that self-control comes from the frontal lobes, that I had a boost of testosterone and decrease in self-control. And that, I think, was a factor in Liberty expelling me. So there's this study that I read where males have to learn how to lie to get ahead. It's self-preservation, it's beneficial, it's self-destruction to be honest in the wrong situation. And so telling the truth can get you negative consequences, which happened to me with Liberty University. Telling the truth about their corruption, their teaching communism despite claiming to be a Christian university, etc. But when you have a testosterone spike, that makes it really difficult to self-control what you say to deceive in order to protect yourself, because you have to lie to get jobs, you have to lie to get good grades, you have to lie to get ahead in life. You're not going to make it very far if you're honest. But when you have a testosterone, it's like, screw you, I'm going to tell the truth anyway. And I'm pretty sure that was one of the contributing factors to my outcomes. And so that led me to kind of realize that I drew that conclusion before when I was living on a sailboat, which is relevant to parts of the brain. So, trouble forming complete words and sentences. You got Broca's area, Wernicke's area. I don't think I had trouble with comprehension because I was reading a ton of books, and if I didn't understand the words, I would look up their definition, and then I realized Google is actually changing the language by switching the definitions of words. Like, I'd get a different result for the same word search definition over the years. I want to get an Encyclopedia Britannica set from like the 1990s just to see how bad it's changed, how much these social engineers, social programmers are subverting society. It smells good. Sorry, it's a sunny day and nobody's smoking marijuana. I smell pollen and fresh cut grass. Anyway. I think all my subcortical activity from reading, it's enhancing my experiences with reality without drugs. But I digress. So yeah, language output and language reception. Normally, this brain comes out because it's not on the inside; it's on the outside. The parieto-temporal lobe, and that's how I began to assess it: frontal lobe, parietal lobe, temporal lobe, occipital lobe. Afferent and efferent fibers, I began to map out the brain, and brain mapping really helped me figure out. I don't know why this brain is stuck. Normally, it just pops right out, but figure out the location of my brain injury based on the symptoms that everyone around me was lying about and just pretending like nothing was wrong with me and everything's fine. If we just ignore it, it will go away. Weird, because even my family was like that. And all these Vashon liberals, haha, which is crazy because it's supposed to be the party of science, but somehow they were very anti-scientific when it came to the fact that I had a mental illness, marijuana setting off, or that I have a brain injury. So this area, roughly right up here, the anterior parieto-temporal lobe this is the parietal lobe, this is the temporal lobe, right in here. That's where speech output is, I believe. I could be wrong. I don't feel like working it up right now. Sorry. And then Wernicke's area is back here. So comprehension is fine, output is bad. Two types of language: reception and transmission, outgoing and incoming. You can listen and process language and understand it accurately, and then you can speak it and use it accurately. Two separate parts of the brain, the mouth and the ears. So, therefore, it had to be towards the front. Now, I can't recall for certain, but I think most of the neuroscience studies say that it's on the left side of the brain, or it's symmetrical, or asymmetrical, sorry. You don't have speech on both halves of the brain. It's typically the left side. If I'm correct, I could be wrong. I actually have a brain injury document that I was supposed to read. Anyway, nonetheless, to me, this was an obvious sign of impairment. I would have memory issues. I would black out while driving. But I began sailing, and I did a lot of charts and old-fashioned navigation, which was a brain exercise in itself, so my hippocampus is fine. There's different kinds of memory, but given that just going sober and doing the brain exercises made me recover all these memories, my hippocampus was fine, especially with navigation on a sailboat with a chart. That's very much the same thing as like a taxi driver navigating without GPS, just using the brain to memorize streets and routes and directions and whatnot, and maps. Yeah. So the damage is definitely towards the front, and the lack of behavioral inhibition. So it was clearly the frontal lobes, most likely the prefrontal cortex. But somehow my body was also telling me it was on the right side. Now, another faction in all this, or factor, is to be considered, is I began to bicycle. When I got discharged from the hospital, the doctor told me I'd never walk again without a cane. And so I began to bicycle 1 mile a day, 2 miles a day, built up to 30 miles every 2 or 3 days just to walk without a cane. And I had the brain memorization of my bicycle route. It's been 17 years now at least, but go up the main highway, catch the northern ferry to the West Seattle ferry terminal. I think it was like Lincoln Park or something. I can't remember. And then bicycle north along the waterfront, because there's a bike trail that goes along the waterfront to downtown Seattle and then up to Ballard. And then when I would hit like Golden Gardens Park or something, it's like a beach out there with the marina, I would turn around and bicycle back 15 miles one way, 15 miles back, 30 miles every 2 or 3 days. That improved the brain because of the cerebral vascular functions. Your brain has ventricles, so improving blood flow to the brain. That might be one of the reasons I have difficulty getting a job, as most of these companies are profit motivated, and I am bad for profits. Bicycling was also a non-narcotic pain management alternative, which reduced my dependence on opiates and narcotic painkillers. I also do hot baths as another non-narcotic pain management alternative. I don't do drugs to kill the pain. I don't do drugs to regulate my dopamine as antipsychotics. Diet and exercise, way more effective. Just avoiding the involuntary exposure to secondhand marijuana, that's the only issue that I have. That's more of a disability than amputations. So I'm costing the medical industry based on the attitude that an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. All these preventative methods, diet and exercise, also prevent diabetes, also prevent heart disease, kidney stones, strokes, etc. And so it's odd to me that the government and society and corporations are so corrupt that nobody is positively reinforcing and rewarding this behavior with, well, let's get him some help. Let's get him a job. Let's get him housing that's drug free. Let's get him housing where there's no secondhand marijuana. Let's get him into a community where there's no secondhand marijuana. Let's get him into some sort of existence where he does not have to contend with involuntary exposure to secondhand marijuana against his will and without his consent, which is clearly crippling his life. Too corrupt. So I am punished for doing the right thing and being good. Because it's just not profitable. And the guiding star to the capitalist moral compass is greed. A greed-based system, greed-based motivation. But if I were to compromise my values, it's not just some sort of idiotic religious abstraction. I would end up diabetic, I would end up with drug addictions, I would end up, just all kinds of negative harms. I would end up with more amputations, etc. Or dying. So it's a tangible, real dynamic of cause and effect relationships. It's not some sort of general, vague abstraction. And I think that's what religion helps people with, just like drugs. It's an escape from reality, an escape into abstraction, right? You're in the Jesus fantasy or whatever. Anyway. So that's how I was able to accurately assess the location and severity of my brain injury based on the behaviors. And when I got the brain scan later on, which I did mail a thing to some sort of brain injury association, and I'm hoping they actually do request those files, because that record would be really... I need it to get my driver's license. When I first went for mental health care and Greg Thompson told me I was fine, get a job, despite self-inflicting amputations with electricity like a few months prior, I got a job moving cars for Ford. I wrecked 5 cars in a week and was fired by my second paycheck. I would black out behind the wheel completely sober. Lost time. The temporal spatial parts of the brain are very distinct, but also similar to how you use your imagination, because it's multiple parts of the brain working together, right? Like, you get a lot of spatial mapping here, but then there's other parts that, also do spatial mapping and time, temporal, conception and things like that. So the simile of the art thing is there's 6 different parts of the brain that work together to do the imagination. They figured this out in an experiment where they did the brain scanners and had people visualize a bee with a bull's head. And the strong theory was that if you have brain damage to 1 or 2 of these components, well, the other 4 or 5 will work together and compensate for the damage that happened to the 5th and possibly 6th. Or 6th and 5th. So here I am, educating myself, preventing a dependence on Medicaid. The prosthetic thing, so... Geez, this is like one long run-on sentence. I hope it's not word salad, because there's a lot of valid data in this. Plus, I'm in a really good mood. I did a lot of exercise this morning. Dopamine, serotonin, endorphins, oxytocin. Did cardio, the Muay Thai, kickboxing stuff. Yeah. Anyway. When I first started living on a sailboat, I eventually began working on a sailboat, which happens when you sail a lot. You have to do repairs at sea with no dock or shop or, power tools, etc. Well, I got really good at working with fiberglass, plus I had previous construction experience, and that really helped. So I began to do my own repairs on my prosthetic. And the Medicare at the time eventually became Medicaid because of a mistake by the Social Security Administration. They approve one prosthetic, I believe it's every 6 months. and the prostheticians, it might be once a year, but the prostheticians typically bill Medicaid or Medicare like $10,000 minimum. It's sometimes 11,000 or 12,000, with maybe $200 to $300 worth of materials for cost. So the profit margin is insane. Prosthetic doctors are making a ton of money. Prostheticians in cash. Well, I began to learn how to do my own repairs. So I went 4 years without a new prosthetic, and then I got one, and I went another 2 years, and then I broke that one, I got another one, and then I went 3 years. So at $10,000 per year, 4 plus 2 plus 3, that's $90,000 that I have saved the taxpayer, with no gratitude at all from the government or the taxpayer. So I'm bad for profit for these profit motivated medical industries because I've done my own research into anatomy, physiology, psychology, and solve my own problems, which reduces taxpayer expense and taxpayer dependence and pushes me towards employment where I could be a tax producer and a taxpayer. Why wouldn't the government facilitate that, promote that, enhance it, reward it, instead of punishing it by forcing drugs on me and stuff? It's counterintuitive. It doesn't make any sense to me. Wouldn't you want more taxpayers? Marijuana legalization is causing the increase of dropout rates, which means the increase of unemployment from students who just never become employed. It's a loss of income. They have some sort of name for it in states like Colorado, etc. Well, I recall going to vocational rehab in 2009. This is a federal, vocational rehabilitation. And the woman assessed me within 5 minutes as having a brain injury. And at that time, I was living on Vashon Island, so it didn't make any sense to me that all these Vashonites and Seattleites and my family that I've interacted with in person, in real life, somehow just did not notice symptoms that were so obvious that this woman was able to pick them up within like 2 minutes of meeting me. And so she closed my file and told me that clients with brain injuries tend to have difficulty maintaining hygiene, which is bad for employment and makes them difficult to hire. I didn't tell her I had a brain injury that I recall, and so she just figured it out. So it didn't make any sense to me that all these Vashonites and all these other people were just blind to the fact that I had such poor hygiene. So I realized that I cannot rely on these people for the truth, for honesty, for honest feedback. And now I make it a point to shower and do hygiene, which I've maintained successfully as part of my own self-applied mental health. Keep yourself to a rigid schedule. And that has really, really improved my life. And yeah, I shower at least once every day or 2 days. Given that I'm unemployed right now, I'll go every couple days, 2 days without a shower. Yeah. When it comes to the inner locus of control and outer locus of control, everything within my control on my end, I'm doing right. And I'm still getting screwed by corrupt society and government, corporations, and people. Thank you for your time.